The doorbell chimed, shattering the peaceful Sunday afternoon. I froze, wooden spoon in hand, a pot of simmering marinara sauce momentarily forgotten on the stove. My husband Ethan's footsteps echoed down the hallway as he went to answer. "Mom," I heard him say, surprise coloring his voice. "What are you doing here?" My stomach clenched. Mary. My mother-in-law's unexpected visits never boded well. I wiped my hands on my apron and stepped into the living room, plastering on a smile. "Mary, what a lovely surprise," I said, hoping my voice didn't betray my unease. Mary stood in the doorway, her perfectly coiffed silver hair gleaming in the afternoon sun. Her eyes, sharp as ever, darted around the room before settling on me. "Ava, dear," she said, her tone saccharine, "I hope I'm not interrupting anything." "Not at all," Ethan said, ushering her inside. "We were just about to have dinner. Would you like to join us?" I shot him a look, but he missed it, focused on helping his mother remove her coat. "Oh, I wouldn't want to impose," Mary said, even as she settled herself on our sofa. "I just needed to speak with you both about something important." The hairs on the back of my neck stood up. "Is everything all right?" I asked, perching on the arm of Ethan's chair. "Is it Henry? Is he okay?" Mary's face crumpled, and for a moment I saw genuine pain in her eyes. "It's your father," she said, turning to Ethan. "The doctor called this morning. His condition, it's worse than we thought." Ethan leaned forward, his face etched with concern. "What do you mean, Mom? What did the doctor say?" I reached out and squeezed his shoulder, my heart aching for him. Henry had been battling Parkinson's for years, but lately his decline had been more rapid. Mary dabbed at her eyes with a lace handkerchief. "He needs more care than I can provide at home. The doctor, he's recommending a nursing facility." "A nursing home?" Ethan's voice cracked. "But Dad always said he wanted to stay at home." "I know, dear," Mary said, reaching out to pat his knee, "but we have to think about what's best for him now. The facility the doctor recommended is excellent, but—" I knew what was coming before she said it. "It's expensive," Mary finished, her eyes now fixed on me. "Very expensive." The room fell silent, save for the distant bubbling of my neglected marinara sauce. I could feel the weight of Mary's gaze, the unspoken expectation hanging in the air. Ethan cleared his throat. "How much are we talking about, Mom?" Mary named a figure that made my breath catch. "It was more than double our mortgage payment." "We'll find a way," Ethan said immediately, ever the dutiful son. "Won't we, Ava?" I nodded, even as my mind raced through our finances. We had some savings, but not nearly enough to cover this kind of expense long term. "Of course," I said. "We'll do whatever it takes to make sure Henry gets the best care." Mary's smile didn't quite reach her eyes. "I knew I could count on you both. You're such a blessing, Ava. I don't know what we'd do without you." Something in her tone made me uneasy, but I pushed the feeling aside. This was about Henry, about family. Whatever it took, we'd make it work. As Mary launched into details about the facility, I excused myself to check on dinner. In the kitchen, I stirred the sauce mechanically, my mind whirling. How were we going to afford this? What sacrifices would we need to make? The sound of breaking glass startled me from my thoughts. I rushed back to the living room to find Mary standing over the shattered remains of my favorite vase, a gift from my late mother. "Oh, I'm so sorry," she said, not sounding sorry at all. "How clumsy of me." As I knelt to clean up the pieces, a shard nicked my finger. A drop of blood welled up bright red against my skin. I couldn't shake the feeling that it was an omen of things to come. The alarm blared at 5:30 a.m., jolting me awake. I groaned, my hand fumbling to silence it. Beside me, Ethan stirred but didn't wake. I envied his ability to sleep through anything. As I stumbled to the bathroom, the weight of our new reality settled on my shoulders. It had been 2 weeks since Mary's bombshell about Henry's care, and our lives had been turned upside down. The nursing facility costs were astronomical, and our savings were dwindling fast. I stared at my reflection in the mirror, noting the dark circles under my eyes. "You can do this," I whispered to myself. Today was my first day back at work after 7 years as a homemaker. The thought made my stomach churn with anxiety. By the time Ethan woke up, I was dressed in my new business attire, a far cry from my usual comfortable clothes. He blinked at me, confusion clouding his face for a moment before realization dawned. "Ava, you don't have to do this," he said, his voice still husky with sleep. "We can figure something else out." I forced a smile. We've been over this, Ethan. It's the best solution. Besides, it'll be good for me to get back out there. He pulled me into a hug, and I breathed in his familiar scent, drawing strength from his embrace. You're amazing, you know that? He murmured into my hair. As I drove to my new job at a local real estate office, my phone buzzed. Mary's name flashed on the screen. I hesitated before answering. Ava, dear? Mary's syrupy voice filled the car. I hope I'm not catching you at a bad time. I'm on my way to work, Mary. Is everything okay? Oh, yes, everything's fine. I just wanted to check if you'd sent this month's payment for Henry's care. The facility called, and I wouldn't want there to be any misunderstandings. My grip tightened on the steering wheel. I transferred the money to your account last week, Mary, just like we agreed. Did you? Oh, I must have overlooked it. I'll check again. Drive safely, dear. The call ended, leaving me with a knot in my stomach. Something about Mary's tone didn't sit right with me. At the office, I threw myself into learning my new role, grateful for the distraction. My coworkers were kind, if a bit curious about the new middle-aged recruit. By lunchtime, I was exhausted but feeling more confident. As I unwrapped my sandwich in the break room, my phone buzzed again. This time it was Ethan. Hey, how's your first day going? He asked. It's going, I replied, trying to inject some enthusiasm into my voice. How are you doing? There was a pause. I just got off the phone with the nursing facility. They said they haven't received our payment yet. My blood ran cold. That's impossible. I transferred the money to your mom last week. I know. I told them that. They said they'll look into it, but Ava, I'm worried. This isn't like Mom to forget something so important. I bit my lip, Mary's earlier call suddenly taking on a sinister tone. Ethan, I think we need to talk to your mother. Something doesn't feel right. What do you mean? His voice sharpened. Ava, if you're implying. I'm not implying anything, I cut him off. I just think we need to get to the bottom of this. Can you call her? See if she can meet us for dinner tonight? He agreed, albeit reluctantly. As I hung up, my new boss, Sandra, poked her head into the break room. Everything okay, Ava? You look a bit pale. I forced a smile. Just some family stuff, nothing to worry about. But as I returned to my desk, worry gnawed at me. What if the money hadn't gone through? What if Mary had? No, I couldn't think like that. She was Ethan's mother, for heaven's sake. As the day wore on, my unease grew. By the time I left the office, my nerves were frayed. I dreaded the conversation ahead, but I knew we needed answers. Pulling into our driveway, I saw Mary's car, already parked outside. My heart raced as I walked to the front door, steeling myself for what lay ahead. Little did I know, this dinner would be the beginning of a nightmare that would test the very foundations of our family. I sat across from Mary at our dining table, my fingers drumming nervously on the polished wood. Ethan paced behind me, his agitation palpable in the tense atmosphere. Mom, Ethan began, his voice strained. We need to talk about the nursing home payments. Mary's face remained impassive, her perfectly manicured nails tapping against her wine glass. What about them, dear? I leaned forward, my eyes locked on Mary's. The facility called. They haven't received the money for this month. A flicker of something, surprise, guilt, crossed Mary's face before her usual mask of calm settled back into place. Oh, there must be some mistake. I'm sure I took care of it. Ethan stopped pacing and placed his hands on the back of my chair. Mom, Ava transferred the money to your account last week. We have the bank statement to prove it. Mary waved her hand dismissively. Well, you know how these things can be. Banks make mistakes all the time. My patience snapped. Mary, this isn't a bank error. The money left our account and went into yours. What happened after that? Her eyes narrowed, a hint of steel entering her voice. Are you accusing me of something, Ava? Before I could respond, Ethan intervened. No one's accusing anyone, Mom. We just need to figure out what happened to the money. Mary's demeanor suddenly shifted, her eyes filling with tears. Oh, Ethan, I'm so sorry. I should have told you sooner. My heart raced as I braced myself for what was coming. I had to use the money for an emergency, Mary said, dabbing at her eyes with a napkin. Your cousin Sarah? You remember her, don't you? She called me in tears. Her husband left her and she was about to lose her house. I couldn't just stand by and do nothing. Ethan's grip on my chair tightened. Mom, that money was for Dad's care. How could you? I know, Mary interrupted, her voice quavering. I was going to pay it back, I swear. I just needed a little more time. I felt a surge of anger. Mary, why didn't you tell us? We could have figured something out together. She turned her teary gaze on me. I didn't want to burden you both. You've already done so much. Ethan ran a hand through his hair, frustration etched on his face. Mom, we need to fix this. The nursing home needs to be paid. Mary nodded, composing herself. Of course, dear. I'll take care of it first thing in the morning. I have some savings I can use. As she spoke, a thought niggled at the back of my mind. Something about this didn't add up. Mary, I said slowly, how did you transfer the money to Sarah so quickly? Bank transfers usually take a few days to process. Her eyes widened slightly, and I knew I'd caught her in a lie. Oh, well, I wired it to her. It was faster that way. Ethan looked between us, confusion clear on his face. Mom, what's going on? Mary's facade cracked just for a moment, and I saw a flash of calculation in her eyes. Then she burst into fresh tears. I'm so sorry, I didn't mean for this to happen. I have a problem. What kind of problem? Ethan asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Gambling, Mary choked out. I've been trying to stop, but I thought if I could just win big once, I could pay for your father's care and you wouldn't have to worry anymore. The room fell silent, the weight of Mary's confession hanging heavy in the air. Ethan looked shell-shocked, while I felt a mix of anger and pity swirling in my chest. We need to see your bank statements, I said firmly. All of them. We need to know exactly how much money is missing. Mary nodded meekly, all fight gone from her. Of course, I'll bring them over tomorrow. As she gathered her things to leave, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were only scratching the surface of Mary's deception. The road ahead looked rocky, and I wondered how our family would weather this storm. Ethan walked his mother to the door, their hushed conversation drifting back to me. As the door closed, he turned to me, his face a mask of pain and confusion. What are we going to do, Ava? He asked, his voice breaking. I stood and wrapped my arms around him, my mind already racing with possibilities. We'll figure it out, I promised, together. But as I held my husband, I couldn't help but wonder what other secrets Mary might be hiding, and how deep this rabbit hole truly went. The alarm blared at 5 a.m., and I groaned, my body aching from another restless night. It had been 2 weeks since Mary's confession, and the weight of our new reality pressed down on me like a physical force. I dragged myself out of bed, careful not to wake Ethan. He'd been working late, trying to secure a promotion to help cover his father's care. The guilt of my new job adding to his stress gnawed at me. In the kitchen, I brewed coffee and checked my phone. A text from Sandra, my boss, lit up the screen. Big client meeting today. Don't be late. I sighed, downing my coffee. The pressure to perform at work while managing our family crisis was overwhelming. As I rushed to get ready, Ethan stirred. Ava? He mumbled, his voice thick with sleep. Go back to sleep, honey, I whispered, kissing his forehead. I've got an early meeting. His eyes flickered open, concern etched on his face. Did you hear from Mom? I shook my head. Mary had been avoiding our calls since her confession, claiming she needed time to gather her financial records. Each day of silence only deepened my suspicions. I'll try her again today, I promised, though the words felt hollow. The drive to work was a blur of anxiety and half-formed plans. How were we going to dig ourselves out of this mess? At the office, I threw myself into preparation for the client meeting. Maybe if I could land this account, the extra commission would help ease our financial burden. Midway through my presentation, my phone buzzed insistently in my pocket. I ignored it, focusing on the potential client's questions. When we finally broke for lunch, I checked my messages. 5 missed calls from Ethan, and a text that made my blood run cold. Dad's being discharged. Nursing home says we're behind on payments. Call me ASAP. My hands shaking, I ducked into an empty conference room and called Ethan. Ava, thank God, he answered, his voice strained. They're threatening to send Dad home today if we don't pay up. But that's impossible, I sputtered. We gave Mary the money for this month's payment just last week. Ethan's bitter laugh cut through the line. Yeah, well, it seems Mom's gambling problem is worse than we thought. I went to her house this morning. She's gone, Ava, packed up and left. The room spun around me. Gone? What do you mean, gone? I mean, she's vanished. Neighbors said they saw her leave with suitcases last night. Her phone's disconnected. I sank into a chair, my mind reeling. Oh, Ethan. I'm so sorry. What are we going to do? He sighed heavily. I don't know. The nursing home needs $5,000 by end of day, or they're sending Dad home. We can't take care of him ourselves, Ava. He needs round-the-clock care. The enormity of our situation crashed over me. We'd emptied our savings account for last month's payment, believing Mary would handle this month. Now we were broke, with no way to care for Henry. I'll figure something out, I said, my mind already racing. Just try to stall them. I'll be home as soon as I can. I hung up and stared at my reflection in the conference room window. The woman looking back at me seemed older, more determined than the person I'd been just weeks ago. A knock at the door startled me. Sandra poked her head in. Ava, the clients are back. They're ready to sign. I took a deep breath, squaring my shoulders. Sandra, I need a favor. A big one. Her eyebrows rose. What kind of favor? I need an advance on my commission. A big one, and I need it today. Sandra's expression softened. Ava, what's going on? In that moment, I made a decision. No more secrets, no more trying to handle everything alone. I told Sandra everything about Henry, about Mary's deception, about our desperate situation. When I finished, Sandra was quiet for a long moment. Then she nodded. Okay, let's go close this deal. Then we'll talk about that advance. As I followed her back to the meeting room, a plan began to form in my mind. We'd get through this somehow. And when we did, Mary would have a lot to answer for. I squared my shoulders and plastered on a smile. It was time to fight for my family. The sterile smell of the nursing home assaulted my senses as Ethan and I walked down the corridor to Henry's room. It had been a month since Mary's disappearance, and the strain was showing on both of us. Dark circles shadowed Ethan's eyes, matching my own. Ready? I asked, squeezing Ethan's hand. He nodded grimly, pushing open the door. Henry sat in his wheelchair by the window, his once robust frame now frail and hunched. His eyes lit up when he saw us, a spark of recognition that both warmed and broke my heart. There's my boy, Henry said, his voice weak but filled with affection. And Ava, pretty as a picture. I leaned down to kiss his cheek, noting how papery his skin felt. How are you feeling today, Henry? He waved a trembling hand. Oh, same old, same old. Where's Mary? She usually comes with you. Ethan and I exchanged a glance. We decided not to tell Henry about Mary's betrayal, fearing the shock would be too much for his fragile health. Mom's not feeling well today, Ethan lied smoothly. She sends her love. Henry nodded, seemingly satisfied. As Ethan wheeled him out to the garden for some fresh air, I hung back, cornering Henry's nurse. How's he really doing? I asked in a low voice. The nurse, Sarah, hesitated. He has good days and bad days. But honestly, Mrs. Thompson, we're concerned about his rapid decline. Has he been under any unusual stress lately? I bit my lip, guilt gnawing at me. Not that we know of. Why? Sarah lowered her voice. It's just, well, Mrs. Thompson Sr. was here last week. They had quite a heated discussion. Mr. Thompson was very agitated afterward. My blood ran cold. Mary was here? When? Last Tuesday. I assumed you knew. I forced a smile. Of course. Thank you, Sarah. My mind raced as I joined Ethan and Henry in the garden. Mary had been here, despite telling us she was out of state sorting things out. What game was she playing? As we said our goodbyes, Henry grasped my hand. Ava, dear, could you do me a favor? Anything, Henry. His rheumy eyes met mine, suddenly sharp. Check the safe in my old study. The combination is your wedding date. There's something there you and Ethan need to see. Before I could question him further, a coughing fit overtook him. By the time the nurses had him settled, he'd drifted off to sleep. On the drive home, I filled Ethan in on what I'd learned. I can't believe she came here. Ethan fumed, his knuckles white on the steering wheel. What was she thinking? I don't know. I said, but I think we need to check that safe. An hour later, we stood in Henry's musty study. The safe creaked open, revealing a stack of documents. What is all this? Ethan muttered, leafing through the papers. My eyes widened as I scanned a bank statement. Ethan, look at this. It's an offshore account in your mom's name. There's over $500,000 here. Ethan snatched the paper, his face paling. That's impossible. Where would she get this kind of money? As we dug deeper, a sickening picture emerged. False invoices, doctored bank statements, a web of lies stretching back years. She's been embezzling from Dad's company, Ethan whispered, horror etched on his face. All this time. My phone buzzed. A text from Sarah. Mr. Thompson took a turn. Come quickly. I showed Ethan the message, our eyes meeting in shared anguish. What do we do? I asked, my voice barely audible. Ethan's jaw clenched, a determination I'd never seen before hardening his features. We go to the police. Then we go to Dad. It's time to end this. As we rushed out the door, the weight of the decision pressed down on me. We were about to shatter what was left of our family. But as I thought of Henry, alone and declining in that sterile room, I knew we had no choice. The storm we'd been dreading was finally breaking, and we had to face it head-on. The shrill ring of my phone jolted me awake. I fumbled for it in the darkness, my heart racing as I saw the nursing home's number flash on the screen. Mrs. Thompson? The night nurse's voice was tense. You need to come immediately. Your father-in-law has taken a turn for the worse. I shook Ethan awake, and we dressed in a frantic blur. The drive to the nursing home was a nightmare of screeching tires and red lights that seemed to last an eternity. We burst into Henry's room to find a flurry of activity. Doctors and nurses swarmed around his bed, their urgent whispers filling the air. What's happening? Ethan demanded, his voice cracking. A doctor turned to us, his face grave. Mr. Thompson has suffered a severe stroke. We're doing everything we can, but... His words faded into background noise as I watched Henry's chest rise and fall with painful effort. How had things gone so wrong so quickly? Hours crawled by as we waited for news. As dawn broke, the doctor returned, looking exhausted. We've stabilized him, he said, but he'll need specialized care, more than we can provide here. Relief flooded through me, quickly followed by a new wave of anxiety. What kind of care? I asked. There's a facility that specializes in stroke recovery, the doctor explained. But it's expensive, and they require payment up front. Ethan and I exchanged a look of despair. We drained our savings paying for Henry's care here. How could we possibly afford something even more expensive? How much? Ethan asked, his voice hollow. The figure the doctor named made my knees weak. It was more than we made in a year. We'll figure it out, I said, squeezing Ethan's hand. Somehow. But as we left the hospital, reality crashed down on us. We had no money, no assets to liquidate, and Mary had vanished with the embezzled funds. Maybe we could get a loan, I suggested weakly as we entered our house. Ethan shook his head, slumping onto the couch. With what collateral? We're already mortgaged to the hilt. I was about to respond when Ethan's phone rang. He answered, his face darkening as he listened. What is it? I asked as he hung up. That was the nursing home, he said, his voice trembling with rage. They're threatening to discharge Dad. Apparently, we're 3 months behind on payments. What? I gasped. But that's impossible. We've been transferring the money to your mom's account every month. Ethan's eyes widened with sudden realization. Mom, he growled. She never paid them. She took the money and ran. The room spun around me as the full weight of Mary's betrayal hit home. Not only had she stolen from Henry's company, but she'd also taken the money meant for his care. We need to go to the police, I said, reaching for my phone. Wait, Ethan said, grabbing my wrist. His eyes bore into mine, filled with an emotion I couldn't quite place. Before we do that, I need to know something. My stomach clenched. What? Did you know, he asked, his voice low and dangerous. About the money, about Mom's embezzlement. Did you know any of it? I recoiled as if he'd slapped me. How can you ask me that? Of course I didn't know. Then why were you so suspicious of her? He pressed. You've been uneasy about Mom for weeks. Why? Anger and hurt warred within me. Because I could see what you couldn't, I shouted. I saw how she manipulated you, how she always had an excuse for everything. I knew something was wrong, but I never imagined it was this bad. Ethan's face crumpled, the fight draining out of him. I'm sorry, he whispered. I don't know who to trust anymore. As I watched my husband break down, the man I loved reduced to a shell of himself by his mother's betrayal, something inside me hardened. This ended now. I picked up my phone again, my fingers steady as I dialed. Hello, police? I'd like to report a crime. The police station buzzed with activity as Ethan and I sat in hard plastic chairs, waiting. My hands trembled as I clutched a manila folder filled with bank statements and the damning documents we'd found in Henry's safe. Mr. and Mrs. Thompson? A detective approached, his face grim. We've located your mother. Ethan stood abruptly, his voice tight. Where is she? She's being brought in for questioning. We'll need you both to stay here. As if on cue, the station doors burst open. 2 officers escorted Mary in, her usually immaculate appearance disheveled, her eyes locked onto us, a mixture of defiance and fear flashing across her face. "Ethan, darling," she called out, her voice sickly sweet. "There's been a terrible misunderstanding." I felt Ethan stiffen beside me. "No, Mom," he said, his voice cold. "No more lies." The detective ushered us into separate rooms for questioning. Hours passed as we recounted every detail, every suspicion, every betrayal. By the time we emerged, I felt wrung out, my emotions raw and exposed. In the hallway, we came face to face with Mary again. This time, her mask had slipped, revealing the desperation beneath. "You don't understand," she hissed, her eyes darting between us. "I did it for us, for the family." I couldn't hold back anymore. "For the family?" I spat. "You stole from your own husband, left him to suffer without proper care. How dare you claim this was for anyone but yourself?" Mary's face contorted with rage. "You," she snarled, jabbing a finger at me. "You turned my son against me. This is all your fault." Ethan stepped between us, his voice shaking with anger. "No, Mom, this is your fault. Your lies, your theft, your betrayal. It ends now." As the officers led Mary away, her shouts echoing down the hallway, my phone buzzed. It was the nursing home. "Mrs. Thompson, we need to discuss your father-in-law's situation urgently." My heart sank. In the chaos of Mary's arrest, we'd forgotten about Henry's precarious condition. "We can't keep him here without payment," the administrator said, her voice apologetic but firm. "We'll have to discharge him tomorrow." Panic clawed at my throat. "Please, we just need a little more time. We're sorting out a financial situation." "I'm sorry, but we've already extended too much credit. If you can't pay by noon tomorrow, we'll have to release him to your care." The call ended, leaving me shell-shocked. Ethan looked at me, his face ashen. "What are we going to do?" he whispered. I took a deep breath, steeling myself. "We fight. We've come this far. We're not giving up now." We spent the night making frantic calls, to banks, to lawyers, to anyone who might be able to help. But as dawn broke, we were no closer to a solution. Exhausted and desperate, we arrived at the nursing home. Henry was awake, his eyes clearer than they had been in weeks. "I heard you found the safe," he said, his voice weak but steady. Ethan nodded, tears in his eyes. "Dad, I'm so sorry, we had no idea." Henry held up a trembling hand. "No apologies. You did what needed to be done." He fumbled with something on his bedside table, producing a small key. "There's one more thing you need to see. In my old desk, bottom drawer, this key will open it." Hope flared in my chest. Could this be the solution we so desperately needed? As we prepared to leave, a commotion erupted in the hallway. Mary's voice, shrill and angry, cut through the air. "You can't keep me from my husband. I have rights." Ethan and I exchanged panicked looks. How had she gotten here? What more damage could she do? As Mary burst into the room, her eyes wild, I knew we were facing our final confrontation. Everything we had fought for, everything we had endured, had led to this moment. With Henry watching, his face a mask of sorrow and resolve, I squared my shoulders. Whatever came next, we would face it together. The tension in Henry's hospital room was palpable as Mary stood before us, her eyes wild with desperation. Ethan moved protectively in front of his father's bed while I clutched the small key Henry had given us. "You ungrateful children," Mary spat, her voice dripping with venom. "After everything I've done for this family." Henry's weak voice cut through the chaos. "Enough, Mary, it's over." We all turned to look at him, surprised by the strength in his tone. He struggled to sit up, and I rushed to help him. "Henry, please," Mary pleaded, her demeanor suddenly shifting. "You don't understand. I was trying to secure our future, our comfort." Henry's eyes, once clouded with illness, now shone with clarity and determination. "By stealing from me? From our son? No, Mary, I understand perfectly." He turned to Ethan and me. "The desk," he said. "Go now." We didn't need to be told twice. Leaving Henry under the watchful eye of the nursing staff, we raced to his old study. With trembling hands, I inserted the key into the bottom drawer of his antique desk. Inside, we found a thick envelope. Ethan tore it open, revealing stacks of documents, stock certificates, property deeds, and a handwritten letter from Henry. "He knew," Ethan whispered, his voice choked with emotion. "He knew what Mom was doing all along. He was gathering evidence." As we pored over the documents, the full extent of Mary's deception became clear. She hadn't just been embezzling from the company. She'd been siphoning money from their personal accounts for years, building a secret nest egg for herself. Armed with this new information, we returned to the hospital. The police had arrived, alerted by the staff to Mary's unauthorized presence. "Mom," Ethan said, his voice steady despite the pain in his eyes. "It's time to tell the truth. All of it." Faced with the overwhelming evidence and Henry's unwavering gaze, Mary's carefully constructed facade finally crumbled. She confessed to everything, the embezzlement, the lies, the manipulation. As the police led her away, she turned to us one last time. "I only wanted what was best," she said, her voice small and broken. "No, Mary," I replied, finding strength I didn't know I possessed. "You only wanted what was best for yourself." In the days that followed, we worked tirelessly to set things right. With Henry's hidden assets, we were able to cover his medical expenses and move him to a better facility closer to our home. The company initiated legal proceedings against Mary, and Henry filed for divorce. Weeks turned into months, and slowly our lives began to find a new rhythm. Ethan and I grew closer through the ordeal, our bond strengthened by the trials we'd faced together. One crisp autumn morning, as we sat with Henry in the garden of his new nursing home, I felt a flutter in my stomach. Placing a hand over my abdomen, I knew with sudden certainty that our family was about to grow in an unexpected way. "Ethan," I said, my voice trembling with joy, "I'm pregnant." The look of pure happiness that spread across his face was mirrored in Henry's eyes. As Ethan embraced me, I caught sight of Henry wiping away a tear. "Life goes on," Henry said softly, "and love, true love, it endures." In that moment, surrounded by the warmth of family, the family we had fought so hard to protect, I felt a profound sense of peace. We had weathered the storm, exposed the lies, and come out stronger on the other side. Mary's betrayal had nearly torn us apart, but in the end, it had brought us closer together. As I looked forward to the future, to the new life growing inside me, I knew that we could face anything as long as we had each other. The path ahead wouldn't be easy. There were still legal battles to fight, wounds to heal, and trust to rebuild. But for the first time in months, I felt hope, bright and unshakable, blooming in my chest. Our story wasn't over. It was just beginning, and this time we would write it together, with honesty, love, and the unbreakable bonds of true family.